Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Let the Right Ones In podcast. I'm your host T. For this episode, we are going to continue on with part 3 of our Dark Side of Animation series, and this episode is going to focus on the grave of the Fireflies and Pom Poko. Now normally, like we did with the first episode, which was Watership Down and Plague Dogs, we would start off with the happier film to kind of ease into things, but we're going to do the reverse today because Grave of Fireflies is a really intense movie, and I would rather kind of talk about that one first before we got into Pom Poko. Kind of ended on a lighter, happier note this time. So Grave of the Fireflies was released in 1988. It was based on a semi-autobiographical short story written by Akiyuki Nosaka in 1967. Basically, the short story illustrated what happened to the author when he was a boy during World War II. He did have more siblings than what's mentioned in the story. However, he kind of wrote the short story as an apology to his little sister that had passed away due to malnutrition, much like the little girl. The movie was also directed by Isao Takahata. What the movie is about: two siblings, an older brother named Seita and his little sister Tsuko. It tells the story about what happens to them during World War II. The film opens up shortly after the war, Seita kind of sitting in a train station alone, and he passes away. There's a bunch of other kind of kids there as well in a similar disheveled and ruined state. Seita does pass away, and then one of the janitors goes through his belongings before cleaning up the body or alerting someone of the body, and he notices a little tin can which he throws in the field. From that, we see the little girl on the tin can, which is Setsuko. Anyway, she springs up from the tin of candy that he had, and she joins her big brother Spirit in a cloud of fireflies, and they board the train. And then the movie just shows what led up to the children's deaths. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, so I won't go into too much depth about how the movie plays out. I mean, obviously the two children die, unfortunately, but I don't want to give out too many details as to exactly what goes down and how that happens. So I think that's a good stopping point for kind of a synopsis. I really like this movie because, of course, since it's Studio Ghibli, the animation is great. Not a complaint about that. And for a lot of things, it's realistic. There's one scene where there is a burn victim, and the burns are pretty gnarly. Like, they don't pull any punches. The scenes where they're being firebombed, of course, the scenes where you see his little sister, Seita's little sister, suffering from malnutrition, those scenes are pretty gnarly. You also have pretty good animated scenes of the fireflies, things that are also fun and nice. Animation is always at a plus. The movie itself is so sad. It's probably the saddest movie I've ever seen. I cried a lot during, I cried a lot after. It's just a really sad and emotional film, and I think there's a lot of elements that come together. You have the beautiful animation that really brings the story to life, but you also have the events as well that are happening. Not to get into too much spoiler territory, but the adults in the movie are pretty much useless. I'm trying to talk about it without giving away too many spoilers, because I feel like this is a movie that you definitely need to watch. I mean, you're not going to want to watch it over and over again, probably. I know for me personally, it was a one and done. I watched it the one time, I believe after the author's passing, and I won't watch it again. Not because it's a bad movie, but just because it's too much for me emotionally. When I first watched it, it was either, I'm not sure if my mom had passed away just yet. I think she may have, or she was still fighting, but terminal, and I watched it, and it just really got me. So I personally don't think I'll ever watch it again, but I think it is an important movie to watch. Like I said, or was alluding to, the adults in the film are pretty useless. The adults just kind of passively watch these children suffer, or they don't really make any moves to help them. And that's something that we kind of don't expect in today's current world or society. There's always rally cries that we have to help the children, we have to do things for the children are the most important. But in this movie, at least for Seita and his little sister Setsuko, they really weren't that important to any adults in their lives except for their parent. Their father was off at war. Unfortunately, they could not be with their mother anymore for reasons. You can probably guess what I'm talking about there, but they could not be cared for by their mother, and so an aunt took them in to take care of them, but she made the children feel like shit for being there, treated them like secondhand citizens in her home, which I can kind of understand because it's wartime, and so certain resources are limited. Of course, you would want your immediate family to have the best, but children are still children, and they're also blood. And to treat them the way that the aunt treated them in this movie, kind of like they were nothing and shittily and throwing shade every chance she got, wasn't constructive. So of course a stubborn ass little boy is going to want to fucking leave and strike out on his own with his little sister. No one makes a move to stop them. No one makes a move to adopt them, bring them in, feed them, give them shelter. All of the adults who knew about these kids just were like, oh, well, kids are kids. Let's just let them live on their own because that's a great idea. They don't really do anything to help the kids. The kids were just in their own world without adult supervision, and how that... I also really liked the dynamic that it had between the brother and sister as well. Seita is the older brother, so he does his best to try to provide for them and take care of them, taking on the role of a caretaker, a provider. In some sense, you could say even a husband or a lover, even though, they're children and they're not doing anything sexual. I don't know if you ever had a relationship with someone where even if you don't do anything sexual or if there's no romantic feelings involved, just this relationship that's kind of based on a partnership. You know what I mean? That you're there for each other, you're supporting each other, and it's a little bit more intimate than it would be. I don't know if I'm describing it right, but for anyone who's kind of been in that situation, I think you might know what I mean, where you have someone in your life that it's a step above brother and sister or friends or something like that, but there's no sexual or romantic feelings. It's just like kind of a deep intimacy that they share with one another. And Seita, he does his best to provide for the both of them, giving them shelter, giving them food, but he's not always able to adequately provide this. And he has to put himself, as well as his sister in a way, in dangerous situations. After all, he's still a boy. He doesn't have the resources that an adult would have. And he also doesn't have the maturity that an adult would have to be able to say, this isn't working. I cannot adequately provide. I need to do something else. I need to try something else. Instead of in the mode that he is as a child, as kind of a teenage boy, like, okay, well, I'm going to continue to try to make this work because we don't have another option. I've burned the bridge. I'm not going back. I have to do what I have to do to make this work. As a boy, there's still some selfishness there as well. When Seita goes to get food or supplies, sometimes he would just gorge himself on things before heading back. Because you gotta look, even though he's trying to provide for his little sister, he's still hungry too. He still needs to eat and be taken care of. And so he goes to fulfill his needs first sometimes before putting the needs of his little sister first. Even though Setsuko is quite young, she does her best to provide emotional support for her brother. She tries to cook for him. She tries to be there for him on an emotional level through support and talking to him, being there for him, loving him. And at some point, she's just a little girl, so whatever she can provide, it's still not enough. It's not the same as having the love of your mom or having the love of someone of your age, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a lover. Because she's so young, she can't fulfill the other needs that Seta has, nor can she help contribute to the situation above being an emotional support for him. In a way, she's kind of a hindrance or a burden because of that. The relationship is unbalanced and uneven, but it's still interesting to see how these dynamics interplay and play out with one another. And ultimately, despite the imbalances, the relationship that they have is beautiful. They still deeply care for one another as brother and sister, and they're kind of all that they've got, with their dad off to war and not being able to be with their mother or any other family. They latch on to each other, and how their relationship grows and the dynamic changes is interesting to see. A lot of people say that The Grave of the Fireflies is an anti-war movie, kind of because it shows the harrowing horrors of war. What happened in Japan during World War II wasn't pretty. Guess you could say what happened everywhere during World War II wasn't pretty either, but it kind of shows the devastation and the fallout. How many other Setas and Setsuko's were out there? How many other children were without their immediate families? How many parents were separated or killed and were unable to provide for their children? How many people lost their home and their livelihoods? There was a lot to be lost, and just a lot of loss in general in the film, and just kind of the graphicness and rawness of war that we don't really think about. A lot of people like to romanticize war. They like to think, oh, well, there was a purpose for this. There was a reason for this. And while there can be purposes for war, not all wars are meaningless. They are sometimes with a purpose, like World War II. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we all like to romanticize war. We don't think of the devastation that war can bring. We only think of the beauty and the good that can result from the end of the war. But we don't think about all the negative and nasty things that can happen before, during, and after. We just kind of like to think of it in a more romanticized way, a more heroic and glamorous way than we do. But this movie definitely highlights that there's nothing really glamorous about war. If you want to hear about more about Grave of the Fireflies, there's a really good video that a YouTuber called Big Joel did on the movie. It's a really good analysis. So if you want something a little bit more in depth than what I've given, I believe he does go into spoilers. It's been a while since I watched the video. It was released about a year ago, but I do remember it and I did enjoy watching it. So I'll link that in the description below. Well, now that we got the sadness of Grave of the Fireflies out of the way, let's just jump into Pom Poko, which is pretty sad as well in some regards, but it's a lot more lighthearted than The Grave of the Fireflies. There's a lot more fun and games and shenanigans, and it's not as emotionally heavy. So, this movie was released in 1994, and it was directed by Isao Takahata as well. I'm going to give kind of a brief synopsis of the movie. I don't want to get into too many spoilers because I feel like this is a movie that everyone, children, adult, definitely needs to watch because it's such a good movie and it has such an important message. Basically, the movie is about this group of raccoons. In Japanese, raccoons are also referred to as tanuki. There is this tribe of raccoons living out in Japan, and their home starts to be developed by this group of land developers. The construction workers come in, they start tearing up the earth, cutting down trees, starting development, as construction workers would do. Well, the raccoons, they decide to take a defensive front against this, and they decide to fight against the developers and try to get humans to stop fucking up their home and land. The fight spans for several years, unfortunately, with not the best of endings for the raccoons. What I really liked about the film is, of course, it's Ghibli, so the animation's great. They do a lot of interesting things with the raccoons. So the raccoons kind of take on a few different kind of shapes. Because according to Japanese folklore, raccoons have illusionary powers, so they can transform into different kind of beings. So the raccoons in the film are kind of animated in different kind of ways that make the film interesting. When humans see them, they look like regular raccoons like we see out in nature, super realistic. But at other times, they're more anthropomorphic, so they're wearing like people clothes. And then the other way you see them is cartoon-like features, which is based on a Japanese manga, which Takahata took inspiration of and that he was a fan of. So we see the more cartoony version when they're doing something whimsical and outlandish, and then we see them being anthropomorphic all other times during the film. So I think that was pretty clever. The illusions that the raccoons create are also pretty beautiful and stunning. Of course, like I said, with Ghibli, you expect everything to be pretty beautiful. The main draw of the film for me is the conservationist message. People are really fucking up the planet. We are just doing irreversible damage to the planet at such a rapid rate that a lot of scientists aren't sure if people will survive it, let alone other animals and creatures on the planet. George Carlin had a bit, basically, where he said something along the lines of, "The planet's fine, the people are fucked." Basically, the point of the bit was him saying that the planet has ways of correcting the mistake of people. Natural disasters, things of that nature, to wipe people out, lower the population, help solve the problem. And while I kind of agree with the spirit of Carlin's bit, the thing of it is, though, we're fucking up the planet at such an alarming rate that the planet may not be able to fix it on its own. It's not exactly self-cleaning, you know what I mean? We're throwing a bunch of shit in the ocean. We're throwing a bunch of shit in the soil. That shit that's leaking into the soil can affect our food, not only for people, but for animals. We're pumping animals full of drugs and stuff, antibiotics, and other things that don't necessarily belong in them in order for us to consume them. And I'm sure that's not good for them either. We're breeding animals that most likely shouldn't be bred, and we're just fucking things up at such an alarming rate that we're even killing off certain species. So, like I said, while I did enjoy the spirit of the bit, we're kind of doing it at a faster rate that the planet may not be able to fix it on its own. So the movie brings to light that, hey, it's important that people do their part and they care about the animals and the environment and not just themselves and making things more comfortable for them. There's also a lot of really fun parts with the movie, aside from the serious message. The way the raccoons transform is pretty hilarious. So basically, testicles play a super huge role in raccoon life. Why? Because raccoons use their testicles to transform. What they'll basically do is they'll use their testicles to shapeshift into different objects or creatures or things like that. In the dub, they don't refer to them as testicles, they just call them their raccoon pouches in the English dub, which is still pretty hilarious. YouTube or Google the transforming scenes for the movie, hilarious. You'll laugh your ass off. And I think those moments of them transforming and then having families and things like that, them falling in love, them being mischievous, helps bring some lightheartedness to the film and also provides a much needed break from some of the more intense scenes. It's also pretty violent in some respects. We see a few people deaths. The raccoons do actually murder some people to stop them from developing the land and to scare off construction workers, to scare off construction workers. We also see quite a few raccoon deaths as well. There's this one scene where the raccoons go into actual battle against some of the construction workers, and a lot of them do end up dead. And there's this one scene where, kind of as a last-ditch effort, some of the dying raccoons kind of band together to form this creature, and the creature ending up in the middle of a road, and you have this whole pile of raccoon corpses, which was pretty gnarly, but it was still pretty sad. I really like how the movie has like a realistic end. Like the whole time you're watching, you're pulling for the raccoons. You're going, they're going to do it. They're going to save their home. And then as things are going on, it's kind of like, oh, we're not going to pull this off? It's not going to be like a good, happy end? No? No? No. But I think the ending of Pom Poko is realistic and it's relevant. I won't spoil the exact end, but there's one scene towards the very end of the film where one of the raccoons breaks the fourth wall and he addresses the audience. And he says something along the lines of, I wonder what happened to the other animals who don't have transformative powers in the forest. Basically acting like a plea towards the audience to just be considerate of animal creatures that they share the space with and to not wipe them out or harm them. My only real dislike about the movie is that it could have been shorter. A lot of Ghibli films are long, but most of them don't feel their length. I feel like this one kind of did. Even though it takes across the span of several years, they could have moved it along a little more. I think cutting maybe 15 to 20 minutes off of it, maybe even 30, would have made it feel a little bit better. But then again, the length could be fine. When I watched it, I did have a concussion, so everything at that time was kind of awful and felt like it was taking forever if I had to look at a screen for really long. So that could be part of it. It could have just been me being fucked up. That was pretty much the only thing that I didn't like about the film that I felt could have been better. But other than that, it's a really great film, and I think it's important for people to watch because of the conservationist message and because it's just a really good movie. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. This podcast is probably, unfortunately, on the shorter side, but I didn't want to give too much away for these films because I think you really should watch them. They're really, really good. Ghibli always puts out good stuff, but I feel like these two films are top tier for Ghibli because they're not all fun and games. They have a really good message. You could also argue that Princess Mononoke, Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky, those also have really good messages as well that are more protect the planet-y. But I feel like Pom Poko was exceptional in doing that. And Grave of Fireflies is just a sad fest. And it's one of the most renowned animated movies there is. So I also wanted to show that one some love. Anyway, like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Next week, we will be talking about The Black Cauldron and The Last Unicorn. I'll also be posting some videos in between. Sorry if the quality and the research may not be as they normally are. I'm starting school again unexpectedly, so if you kind of don't see a podcast out like next week, expect it to be like the next week, as well as kind of videos. I'm going to get used to actually being in a classroom again, so cut me some slack. The videos may be a little bit more casual, but I hope to still have the same level of quality. So anyway, thank you again so much. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye. Bye, bye, bye.